A heavy gavel echoed through Cook County Circuit Court, sealing what felt like another open and shut case. Detective Harlan Voss sat in the witness box, exuding arrogant confidence as he testified against an unassuming black woman he had arrested on a desolate stretch of road. He thought she was a nobody, an easy target for a planted evidence shakedown. He was dead wrong. Voss was blindly walking into a meticulously orchestrated federal trap, completely oblivious that the woman silently taking notes across the room was an undercover FBI agent specifically assigned to destroy his life. The streets of Chicago's South Side can hide a multitude of sins, especially when the temperature drops below freezing, and the freezing wind off Lake Michigan drives everyone indoors. On a bitterly cold night, the avenues were slick with freezing rain. In the shadowy confines of an unmarked police cruiser, Detective Harlan Voss of the 8th District was hunting. Voss was a 14-year veteran of the force, a man whose reputation within the department was a carefully curated mix of high arrest statistics and whispered rumors. To the brass downtown, he was a highly effective, tough-on-crime detective who consistently pulled narcotics off the streets. To the residents of the neighborhoods he patrolled, he was a tyrant. For years, complaints had piled up at the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. The allegations of illegal searches, excessive force, racial profiling, and planted evidence. But somehow, the internal investigations always cleared him. The dashcam footage was always conveniently corrupted. The witnesses were always too intimidated to testify. Voss operated with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he was untouchable. A few miles away, driving a battered 2008 Honda Civic with a flickering left taillight, was Lena Hart. To anyone looking at her, Lena was just an exhausted woman heading home from a late shift. She wore a faded gray nursing scrub top, a frayed winter coat, and a tired expression. But the Honda Civic was not her car. The nursing scrubs were a costume, and Lena Hart was not a civilian. She was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation attached to the Chicago Public Corruption Task Force. For months, the FBI had been quietly building a sprawling federal case against a ring of corrupt officers in the 8th District. The Bureau had received credible intelligence from a confidential informant that Voss was the ringleader of a shakedown crew. They targeted vulnerable minorities, usually late at night, executing illegal traffic stops. If the driver had cash, it was confiscated as suspected drug proceeds. If they didn't, and Voss needed to boost his arrest quota, he would plant a small bag of narcotics, force a plea deal, and ruin a life without a second thought. The FBI needed him caught dead to rights. They needed an airtight, undeniable perjury trap. And Lena, a brilliant undercover operative with a background in behavioral psychology and law, had volunteered to be the bait. Under the cover of darkness, Lena purposefully turned onto Halsted Street, ensuring her flickering taillight was fully visible to the unmarked cruiser idling in the alleyway. Her heart rate remained a steady calm. The Honda Civic was heavily modified. Buried within the dashboard, the rearview mirror, and the headliner were 4 high-definition low-light federal recording devices. A continuous encrypted audio stream was currently transmitting directly to a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, where Special Agent in Charge Marcus Hale sat listening through a headset. Behind her, the cruiser pulled out of the alley. The headlights flashed. Then the inevitable burst of red and blue lights illuminated the rain-streaked windows of the Honda. "Showtime," Lena whispered, her voice barely registering above the hum of the heater. "Suspect is initiating the stop. Target is Harlan Voss. I am pulling over at the intersection of 63rd and Halsted." She eased the Civic to the curb, shifting her posture to appear tense and anxious, the universal body language of a citizen, terrified of a late-night police encounter. In her rearview mirror, she watched Voss step out of his vehicle. He was a large, imposing man wearing a tactical vest over his uniform, a heavy flashlight gripped in his right hand. He didn't approach the window immediately. He took his time walking slowly around the back of the Honda, shining his flashlight into the back seat, asserting dominance before a single word was spoken. When he finally reached her window, he tapped the glass hard with the metal casing of his flashlight. Lena rolled it down, shivering as the freezing wind whipped into the cabin. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Voss barked, leaning in uncomfortably close. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't state the reason for the stop. "Is there a problem, officer?" Lena asked, pitching her voice slightly higher, injecting a subtle tremor of nervousness. "I asked for your paperwork. Hand it over now," Voss demanded. Lena fumbled with her purse, deliberately moving a little too frantically, acting the part of the intimidated civilian. She handed over a meticulously crafted alias identity, an Illinois driver's license belonging to Lydia Bennett, a pediatric nurse with no criminal record. Voss snatched the cards from her hand. He shone the flashlight directly into her eyes, blinding her for a moment. "You know your left taillight is out?" "No, sir, I didn't know." "Where are you coming from?" "Work. I just finished a shift at the clinic." Voss scoffed, a cruel, dismissive sound. He looked at the modest interior of the car, then back at her. In his mind, he was running a calculus he had run 100 times before. She was a black woman alone late at night in a beat-up car in a high-crime area. She didn't have money to hire a high-priced defense attorney. She was perfect. "Step out of the vehicle," Voss ordered. "Step out for a tail light?" Lena asked, allowing her voice to rise in feigned protest. "Step out of the damn car before I pull you out," Voss shouted, his hand dropping to the holster of his service weapon. Inside the surveillance van, Marcus Hale clenched his jaw. He hovered his finger over the tactical radio, ready to flood the street with federal agents if Voss crossed the line into physical violence. But Lena had strict instructions. "Let him dig his grave." Lena slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out into the freezing rain. "Put your hands on the hood. Spread your legs," Voss commanded. He patted her down, his hands unnecessarily rough. "I smell marijuana in the vehicle," he lied smoothly. "I'm conducting a probable cause search." "There's no marijuana in my car," Lena said firmly. "You don't have my consent to search." "I don't need your consent," Voss sneered. He left her standing in the freezing rain and began tearing the Honda apart. He pulled out the glove box, tossed her nursing textbooks onto the wet pavement, and ripped up the floor mats. He was looking for cash. Finding none, his frustration mounted. Lena watched him closely through the rain, tracking his movements with the cold precision of someone who had prepared for this moment for months. Then the moment happened. Voss turned his back to her, leaning deep into the driver's side footwell. When he emerged, he was holding a small clear plastic bag containing a white crystalline substance. "Well, well, well," Voss said, a victorious smirk spreading across his face as he held the bag up to the street lamp. "What do we have here? Looks like our little nurse is moving crystal meth on the side." Lena stared at him, mastering every ounce of her FBI training to suppress the urge to smile. The bag hadn't come from her car. It had come from Voss's tactical vest, and all 4 hidden federal cameras had captured the sleight of hand in crystal-clear 1080p high definition. "That's not mine," Lena said, her voice shaking, not with fear but with the adrenaline of a successful sting. "You just planted that." Voss laughed a dark, hollow sound. He grabbed her roughly by the arm and spun her around, slamming her wrists together. "Save it for the judge, sweetheart. You're under arrest." As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Lena Hart lowered her head, hiding her face from the streetlights. Harlan Voss thought he had just ruined a woman's life. He had no idea he had just handed the United States Department of Justice the key to his own destruction. The ride to the 8th District Precinct was a masterclass in psychological abuse. Voss drove erratically, taking sharp turns that sent Lena sliding painfully across the hard plastic bench of the cruiser's back seat. The entire way, he mocked her. "You're looking at a Class X felony, Bennett," Voss called over his shoulder, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Distribution of methamphetamine. That's a mandatory minimum of 6 to 30 years. The state's attorney is going to eat you alive." Lena remained silent, staring out the rain-streaked window. Her silence irritated him. He was used to his victims begging, crying, pleading for a break. He thrived on the power dynamic, the desperate negotiations that sometimes led to him extorting money in exchange for letting them go. But this woman just sat there, eerily composed. "You got nothing to say?" Voss prodded. "Usually you people are crying about how unfair the system is right about now." "I'd like to invoke my right to remain silent, and I'd like to speak to an attorney," Lena said evenly, quoting the Miranda warning with practiced precision. Voss chuckled. "Good luck affording one, nurse." Upon arriving at the precinct, the dehumanizing machinery of the criminal justice system took over. Lena was processed under her alias, Lydia Bennett. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped of her belongings. She endured the indignity of a holding cell, sitting on a concrete bench next to a woman coming down off a heroin high and a teenager crying over a shoplifting charge. Through the barred window of the holding cell, Lena could see the bullpen where the detectives worked. She watched Harlan Voss sitting at his desk, typing out his arrest report. He was hunting and pecking at the keyboard, sipping a terrible cup of precinct coffee, utterly relaxed. He was weaving the narrative that he believed would send her to prison. The FBI had prepared for this exact scenario. The alias Lydia Bennett had a meticulously backstopped history. If the Chicago Police Department ran her fingerprints, they would bounce back to a dummy file maintained by the DOJ. The system would show her as a clean citizen with no priors. It was essential that Voss suspected nothing. If he knew he had arrested a federal agent, he would destroy his report, claim a misunderstanding, and the Bureau would lose their chance to nail him for felony perjury and civil rights violations under the color of law. They needed him to lock himself into his lies on official government documents. In the early morning hours, the holding cell guard approached the bars. "Bennett, you get one call." Lena was escorted to a wall-mounted phone. She dialed a local Chicago number. It rang twice before it was picked up. "Hello?" A deep voice answered. It was SAC Marcus Hale, sitting in the FBI field office downtown. "Uncle Marcus, it's Lena," she said, projecting a panicked, exhausted tone for the benefit of the listening guard. "I've been arrested. They're charging me with possession. It's completely made up, but I need bail money." "We're on it, Lena," Hale said, his voice dropping the familial pretense entirely, adopting the crisp tone of a commanding officer. "We have the audio and video from the vehicle. It's flawless. You did incredible work. We have an undercover operative acting as your bail bondsman heading to the courthouse now. Just sit tight." "Please hurry, Uncle Marcus," Lena whimpered, hanging up the phone. The following morning, Lena stood before a Cook County magistrate judge for her initial bail hearing. Harlan Voss wasn't there. He had finished his shift and gone home to sleep, comfortable in the knowledge that his paperwork was filed. The prosecutor, an overworked assistant state's attorney who hadn't even looked at the file until minutes before the hearing, read from Voss's sworn affidavit. "Your Honor, the defendant, Lydia Bennett, was pulled over for a traffic violation. Upon approach, Detective Harlan Voss observed the defendant exhibiting erratic and combative behavior. The defendant refused lawful orders to exit the vehicle and physically resisted the officer. Once subdued, a search of the defendant's immediate vicinity yielded 22 grams of crystal methamphetamine. The state requests bail be set at $50,000. So, Lena stood beside a public defender, her face a mask of quiet stoicism. She listened to the lies, cataloging every single false statement. Combative behavior. Physically resisted. Subdued. Voss hadn't just planted the drugs. He had added resisting arrest to ensure she looked violent and unhinged to a jury. Every word he wrote was a separate count of official misconduct and perjury. The judge set bail. The undercover FBI bondsman posted it within the hour. Lena walked out of the courthouse and stepped into a black SUV waiting at the curb. As soon as the doors closed, the facade of Lydia Bennett, terrified nurse, vanished. She leaned back against the leather seats, exhaling a long, steady breath. Marcus Hale handed her a tablet. On the screen was a scanned copy of Voss's official police report. "He went all out," Hale said grimly. "He claims you lunged at him. He signed a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury." Lena read the report, her eyes tracking the typed lines of fiction. "He's greedy. He couldn't just settle for the drug charge. He wanted to make sure I had zero credibility." She handed the tablet back, her expression hardening into absolute resolve. "Let him have his fun. I want him on the stand. I want him to testify to every single word of this under oath. We're going to let it go all the way to the preliminary hearing, Hale confirmed. We let him commit perjury in open court. We let the state's attorney commit to the prosecution, and then we dropped the hammer. In the months that followed, Lena Hart lived a double life. By day, she worked her actual job at the FBI field office, coordinating with the United States Attorney's Office to build the federal indictment against Voss and 3 other officers implicated in his ring. By night, she maintained the fiction of Lydia Bennett. She attended mandatory court check-ins. She sat in the bleak waiting rooms of the Cook County Courthouse, blending in with the dozens of other citizens caught in the grinding gears of the justice system. She hired a private defense attorney named Graham Ellis. To the outside world, Ellis was a sharp, aggressive criminal defense lawyer who specialized in taking on the CPD. In reality, Ellis was a former federal prosecutor who had been read into the FBI's undercover operation. His job was to guide the case to the preliminary hearing without tipping off the state's attorney, or Voss, that a trap had been set. The tension during those months was agonizing. Voss's defense attorney friends repeatedly reached out to Ellis offering plea deals. Plead guilty to possession, we'll drop the resisting arrest charge. 3 years probation. Ellis, acting on Lena's instructions, adamantly refused every offer. He demanded an evidentiary hearing. He demanded that Detective Harlan Voss take the stand to testify about the night of the arrest. Voss, arrogant to the point of blindness, happily obliged. He viewed the hearing as a nuisance, a minor inconvenience required to crush a stubborn defendant. He had testified hundreds of times. He knew exactly how to play the judge, how to speak with polite deference, how to look like the thin blue line protecting the city from chaos. He didn't know the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. On the morning of the preliminary evidentiary hearing, the courtroom of the Honorable Eleanor Briggs was a grand wood-paneled chamber that smelled of floor wax and old paper. Judge Briggs was a no-nonsense jurist, a former prosecutor known for being highly favorable to law enforcement. She had presided over dozens of Voss's cases in the past and had never found a reason to doubt his testimony. At the prosecution table sat Derek Lang, an ambitious assistant state's attorney. Lang believed in the case. He had read Voss's report, and to him it was a standard righteous bust. He had no idea he was acting as an unwitting pawn in a federal sting operation. At the defense table sat Graham Ellis, adjusting his silk tie and organizing a thin manila folder. Beside him sat Lena. She wore a modest, inexpensive navy blue suit. She looked small, defensive, and thoroughly defeated. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Briggs took the bench. "The Circuit Court of Cook County is now in session." Judge Briggs adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket. State of Illinois versus Lydia Bennett. Motion to suppress evidence based on an illegal search and seizure. Mr. Lang, is the state ready to proceed? "We are, Your Honor," Lang said, standing up. "The state calls Detective Harlan Voss to the stand." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Detective Voss strode down the center aisle. He was in his Class A dress uniform, the brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, his badge gleaming on his chest. He carried himself with the heavy, self-assured swagger of a man who owned the room. He didn't even look at Lena as he walked past the defense table. She was completely beneath his notice. Voss stepped into the witness box, raised his right hand, and placed his left on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the clerk asked. "I do," Voss replied, his voice deep and resonant. Lena watched him from the defense table. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and picked up a pen. The moment he uttered those 2 words, "I do," the trap officially snapped shut. Everything he said from this point forward, under oath in a court of law, would be used to dismantle his life. Prosecutor Lang walked to the podium. "Detective Voss, for the record, could you state your name, rank, and years of service?" "Harlan Thomas Voss, Detective, Chicago Police Department, 8th District, 14 years on the force." He answered smoothly, looking directly at the judge to establish rapport. "Detective, I'd like to direct your attention to the night in question. Were you on duty?" "I was." "And did you have occasion to interact with the defendant, Lydia Bennett?" Lang gestured toward the defense table. Voss finally turned his head and looked at Lena. He let a flicker of professional disappointment cross his face, the look of a disappointed father. Yes, I did. I observed the defendant's vehicle, a 2008 Honda Civic, traveling northbound on Halsted Street. The vehicle was swerving erratically, crossing the center yellow line twice, and the driver's side taillight was non-functioning. Lie number 1, Lena thought, making a small check mark on her yellow legal pad. The video evidence would show her driving perfectly straight, maintaining the speed limit. What did you do upon observing this? Lang asked. I initiated a traffic stop for the safety of the public, Voss testified. I approached the vehicle. The defendant was extremely agitated. Her pupils were dilated. She was sweating profusely despite the freezing temperatures, and she was speaking rapidly. Line number 2, check. Did you ask her to step out of the vehicle? I did, sir. Standard procedure when a driver is exhibiting signs of intoxication. However, the defendant refused. She became verbally abusive, shouting profanities, and actively resisted my commands. When I opened the door to assist her out of the vehicle, she lunged at me, attempting to strike me in the chest. Judge Briggs frowned, looking over the top of her glasses at Lena with a distinct expression of disapproval. Lunging at a police officer was a fantastic way to guarantee a judge would deny a motion to suppress. How did you respond to the defendant's physical aggression, Detective? I utilized a standard department-approved control hold, Voss said, smoothly sounding like a textbook. I neutralized the threat, secured the defendant in handcuffs, and placed her against the hood of my cruiser to prevent further violence. Line number 3. Line number 4. Check. Check. Lena's pen scratched quietly against the paper. Beside her, Graham Ellis was perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. And following the arrest, did you conduct a search? Lang asked, moving toward the climax of the narrative. Yes, incident to a lawful arrest, and having detected the distinct chemical odor of narcotics emanating from the vehicle, I conducted a search of the immediate wingspan of the driver's seat. Tucked underneath the driver's side floor mat, I discovered a clear plastic baggie containing a white, crystalline substance. Did you later test this substance? Yes, sir. It field tested positive for methamphetamine. 22 grams. Thank you, Detective, Lang said, turning to the judge. Your Honor, the state submits that the traffic stop was entirely lawful based on the traffic violations and erratic driving. The subsequent search was lawful incident to arrest after the defendant's unprovoked assault on an officer. We ask that the defense's motion to suppress be denied. Thank you, Mr. Lang, Judge Briggs said. She turned her attention to the defense table. Mr. Ellis, you may cross-examine the witness, though I must warn you, the testimony seems quite clear. Graham Ellis stood up slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up his thin manila folder, and walked out from behind the table. He didn't go to the podium. He walked directly toward the witness box, stopping just a few feet away from Voss. The courtroom was dead silent. Voss leaned back in his chair, resting his hands on his belt. He looked at Ellis with a faint, patronizing smile. He was ready for the usual defense attorney tricks. He was ready to bat away questions about lighting, about the chain of custody, about probable cause. Good morning, Detective Voss, Ellis said, his voice quiet, almost conversational. Good morning, Counselor, Voss replied. You've been on the force for 14 years, is that correct? That is correct. 14 years of making arrests, writing reports, swearing affidavits, and testifying under oath in this very courthouse. I take my duties seriously, yes. I'm sure you do, Ellis said. He paced a few steps to the right, keeping his eyes locked on Voss. Detective, let's talk about that night. You testified under oath today, and you swore in your official police report that my client's vehicle was swerving erratically across the center line. That's right. And you testified that when you approached the vehicle, my client was sweating, verbally abusive, and ultimately physically lunged at you. She did, Voss said firmly. Ellis stopped pacing. He tilted his head slightly. Detective, are you aware of the penalties for aggravated perjury in the state of Illinois? Prosecutor Lang shot out of his chair. Objection. Argumentative. Counsel is intimidating the witness. Sustained, Judge Briggs snapped. Mr. Ellis, mind your tone. The detective has answered your questions. "My apologies, Your Honor," Ellis said, not looking the least bit apologetic. He turned back to Voss. "Detective Voss, when you patrol, you drive an unmarked cruiser, correct?" "Yes." "Does that cruiser have a dash cam?" Voss smirked. "It does. Unfortunately, as I noted in my supplemental report, the dash cam system experienced a hard drive failure that week. It was scheduled for maintenance. There is no footage of the stop." "How convenient," Ellis murmured. "Objection," Lang called out again. "Sustained. Mr. Ellis, ask a question," the judge warned. "Of course," Ellis said. He walked back to the defense table. He didn't pick up a legal document. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small black rectangular object, a high-capacity encrypted hard drive. He held it up so the entire courtroom could see it. "Detective Voss," Ellis said, his voice suddenly losing all its conversational warmth, dropping into a tone of absolute chilling authority. "If your dashcam was broken, would you be surprised to learn that my client's vehicle was equipped with 4 hidden federally issued 1080p surveillance cameras?" The smirk vanished from Harlan Voss's face so fast it looked as if he had been slapped. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. In the gallery behind the prosecution, 2 men in identical dark suits stood up and quietly moved to block the rear exit of the courtroom. Judge Briggs leaned forward, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Mr. Ellis, what exactly are you holding?" Ellis turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I am holding a decrypted copy of a continuous multi-angle audio and video recording of the traffic stop in question, a recording that will definitively prove that Detective Voss committed perjury on this stand, falsified an official government record, and actively planted 22 grams of methamphetamine in my client's vehicle." Prosecutor Lang looked like he was going to be sick. He looked from Ellis to the judge and then slowly to Voss. Voss was gripping the wooden rail of the witness box so hard, his knuckles were stark white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Ellis continued, his voice ringing through the stunned silence of the courtroom. He gestured toward the defense table where Lena was slowly standing up. The aura of the defeated, terrified victim was entirely gone. She stood tall, her posture radiating the disciplined, lethal authority of a federal agent. "I need to formally correct the record regarding my client's identity," Ellis said. "The woman sitting at the defense table is not a pediatric nurse named Lydia Bennett. She is Special Agent Lena Hart of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that seemed to press down on the room, broken only by the sound of Harlan Voss's ragged breathing, as the reality of his destruction finally set in. Assistant State's Attorney Derek Lang was the first to break the paralysis. He took a stumbling step backward from the podium, his face draining of color. As a prosecutor, Lang's entire career relied on the integrity of his police witnesses. If he pushed a case built on planted evidence and perjury, he wouldn't just lose his job. He could face disbarment and criminal conspiracy charges. "Your Honor," Lang stammered, his voice cracking, completely abandoning his case. The state was entirely unaware of these developments. Judge Eleanor Briggs did not look at Lang. Her eyes, magnified by her reading glasses, were locked onto Harlan Voss. Judge Briggs was fiercely protective of her courtroom's integrity. She had built a reputation on trusting law enforcement, and Voss had just weaponized that trust, turning her court into an instrument of his personal corruption. The betrayal etched deep lines of fury across her face. "Mr. Ellis," Judge Briggs said, her voice dropping an octave, cold and razor-sharp, "you claim to have federal video evidence contradicting the sworn testimony just provided by this detective." "I do, Your Honor," Ellis replied, stepping toward the bailiff with a sleek encrypted laptop. "With the court's permission, I can connect this directly to the courtroom's AV system. The footage speaks for itself. It captures the entire encounter from 4 distinct synchronized angles, including high-definition audio." "Do it," Briggs commanded. "Objection, Your Honor," Voss suddenly blurted out, his voice shrill with panic. "This is an ambush. That evidence hasn't been submitted through discovery. It's a violation of procedure. "You will sit down and shut your mouth, detective," Judge Briggs roared, slamming her gavel with the force of a gunshot. "You are under oath. You do not make objections. You answer questions. If you speak again without being spoken to, I will hold you in direct criminal contempt and throw you in a county cell myself. Am I understood?" Voss swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the silent room. He sank back into the wooden chair, looking frantically toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. The two men in dark suits, federal agents, had casually moved in front of the exit, their arms crossed. There was no way out. Ellis plugged the laptop into the podium's media port. The large flat-screen monitors mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The screen split into 4 quadrants. The top left showed a view from the Honda Civic's dashboard, looking out at the rainy street. The top right showed a hidden camera built into the rearview mirror, perfectly capturing Lena's face in the driver's side window. The bottom left was positioned in the headliner, offering a wide shot of the interior. The bottom right showed a hidden bumper camera facing backward. Ellis pressed play. The courtroom speakers crackled with the sound of the Honda's heater and the relentless freezing rain. The footage showed Lena driving perfectly straight down Halsted Street. There was no swerving. There was no erratic behavior. Then the red and blue lights flashed on the bottom right screen. The courtroom watched as Voss approached the car. They heard his immediate aggressive hostility. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Hand it over now." They watched Lena's brilliant performance, the nervous, compliant citizen. They watched as she handed over her documents with trembling hands. There was no shouting from her. There were no profanities. Judge Briggs leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as the video played. She looked from the screen down to Voss, who was now sweating profusely, a thick bead of moisture rolling down the side of his face and soaking into the collar of his dress uniform. The video progressed to the search. The entire courtroom watched as Voss ordered Lena out of the car into the freezing rain. They watched him tear the vehicle apart. And then the critical moment arrived. "I will direct the court's attention to the bottom left quadrant," Ellis said loudly, pausing the video. He zoomed in on Voss's back as the detective leaned into the driver's side footwell. Ellis advanced the video frame by frame. At a quarter speed, the high-definition camera caught it all. Voss's right hand slipped down to the utility pouch on his tactical vest. 2 of his fingers pinched a small, clear plastic baggie. He pulled it out, palmed it, and in a single practiced motion dropped it beneath the floor mat. A second later, he pulled his hand back, gripping the baggie as if he had just discovered it. "Well, well, well," Voss's recorded voice echoed through the shocked courtroom. "Looks like our little nurse is moving crystal meth on the side." Ellis hit pause again. The image of Voss holding the planted drugs was frozen on the screens. "Your Honor," Ellis said, closing the laptop with a definitive snap. "Detective Voss did not make a lawful arrest. He orchestrated a kidnapping. He committed aggravated perjury on this stand. He manufactured evidence to falsely imprison a federal agent. Prosecutor Lang didn't even wait for the judge to ask him for a response. He practically sprinted to the podium, desperate to distance the state of Illinois from the radioactive detective. Your Honor, the state moves to immediately dismiss all charges against the defendant with prejudice, Lang practically shouted. Furthermore, the state's attorney's office will be opening an immediate independent criminal investigation into Detective Voss's conduct in this matter. Judge Briggs looked disgusted. Motion to dismiss granted. Agent Hart, you are free to go. Mr. Lang, you're a bit late to the party. I suspect the federal government already has dibs. Before Briggs had even finished her sentence, the two men at the back of the courtroom began walking down the aisle. At the same time, Lena Hart stepped out from behind the defense table. She walked calmly across the well of the court, approaching the witness stand. Voss looked down at her, his chest heaving. His bravado was entirely gone, replaced by the cornered panic of a trapped animal. You, he whispered, his voice trembling. You set me up. I gave you a canvas, Harlan, Lena said, her voice devoid of any emotion, cold and clinical. You painted the picture yourself. She reached beneath her suit jacket and pulled out a pair of federal-issue steel handcuffs. Harlan Voss, Lena announced, her voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of the gallery. You are under arrest for violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. You are also under arrest for federal perjury, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice."
"You can't do this here,"
Voss hissed, trying to stand up, but his legs betrayed him. He slumped back against the wood.
"I want my union rep. I want the FOP attorney."
"You don't get the Fraternal Order of Police for federal civil rights violations, Harlan," Lena said. She grabbed his right wrist, twisting it behind his back with practiced leverage, and snapped the steel cuff shut. "Stand up." When he didn't move fast enough, the two federal agents who had marched down the aisle flanked the witness box, hauling the heavy detective to his feet. Lena secured his left wrist. The loud click-click-click of the ratcheting metal echoed in the stunned courtroom as they marched Harlan Voss out of the courtroom in his dress uniform, parading him past the judge he had lied to, the prosecutor he had manipulated, and the gallery of onlookers who were now recording him on their cell phones. Lena felt no triumph, only a grim, hardened resolve. Taking Voss off the board was just the beginning. Now they were going to use him to tear down the entire precinct. The interrogation room at the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse was deliberately designed to strip away a suspect's sense of control. There were no windows. The walls were painted a sterile, institutional gray. The temperature was kept at a brisk 64 degrees. The table was bolted to the floor, and the heavy metal door locked from the outside. Harlan Voss sat in a rigid metal chair, his wrists now shackled to a heavy ring bolted into the center of the table. They had stripped him of his dress uniform, confiscating it as evidence, and issued him an orange, standard-issue federal holding jumpsuit. The transformation was complete. He was no longer an officer of the law. He was an inmate. For hours he sat alone. This was standard FBI behavioral strategy. They let him marinate in his anxiety. They let the adrenaline of the arrest wear off, leaving behind a crashing wave of exhaustion and reality. Voss knew how interrogations worked. He had conducted hundreds of them himself. But knowing the playbook and being the target of it were two entirely different things. He kept looking at the two-way mirror, knowing they were watching him, analyzing his body language, waiting for his breaking point. Finally, the heavy lock clicked. The door swung open and Special Agent Lena Hart walked in. She had changed out of her courtroom suit and was now wearing tactical trousers, a black polo shirt, and a shoulder holster carrying her standard-issue Glock 19. She was followed by Special Agent in Charge Marcus Hale, a silver-haired, imposing man who carried a thick accordion file bursting with documents. Neither of them spoke. They pulled out the metal chairs opposite Voss and sat down. Hale dropped the massive file onto the table with a heavy, intimidating thud. Voss tried to project defiance, but his eyes were bloodshot and a slight tremor rattled his jaw. "I told the marshals downstairs, I'm not saying a damn word without an attorney." "You have an attorney, Harlan," Hale said smoothly, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Bradley Hayes, highly respected defense lawyer. We called him an hour ago. He said he'd be here, but then we sent over the preliminary discovery file. The video of you planting the meth, the audio, the sworn affidavit where you committed federal perjury." Hale leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Mr. Hayes called back 10 minutes later. He said he has a conflict of interest and will not be representing you. Apparently, even expensive lawyers don't want to tie their reputation to a cop caught dead to rights on 1080p video depriving a federal agent of her civil rights." Voss swallowed hard, the last pillar of his defense crumbling. He was completely isolated. "You're looking at 20 years, Harlan," Lena said, speaking for the first time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She sounded like a surgeon diagnosing a terminal disease. "Under the color of law statutes, considering you used a firearm to effectuate the illegal arrest, the federal sentencing guidelines mandate a minimum of 2 decades in a maximum security penitentiary. And as a former cop, they'll have to put you in protective custody. 20 years in a 6x8 concrete box for 23 hours a day."
"You think you broke me," Voss sneered, trying to summon a hollow bravado. "I've been in this city a long time. The union won't let a federal witch hunt railroad a decorated detective."
Hale chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. He opened the thick accordion file. "Let's talk about your union, Harlan. Let's talk about your so-called brotherhood." Hale slid a printed transcript across the metal table. "Do you know what a Title III wiretap is?" Voss's eyes darted down to the paper, a sickening feeling twisting in his gut. "We didn't just target you," Lena explained, leaning back in her chair. "You're a symptom. We're going after the disease. We've had a federal wire on Captain Victor Langford's personal cell phone for the last 90 days. We know exactly how the 8th District Shakedown crew operates. We know you target undocumented immigrants and lower-income minorities because you know they won't complain to COPA. We know you seize cash and split it in the precinct locker room." Voss stared at the transcript. It was heavily redacted, but the unredacted portions were devastating. "Read the highlighted section, Harlan," Hale urged softly. "That's a conversation from last week between Captain Langford and Sergeant Cole, right after the state's attorney requested an evidentiary hearing for the Lydia Bennett case." Voss's eyes tracked across the yellow highlighter ink. "Langford, Voss is getting sloppy. If this nurse actually pushes this to a hearing, the SA is going to ask questions. Cole, Harlan says he's got it under control. The dash cam was busted." Langford, "I don't care what he says. If internal affairs or the feds even sniff around this, we cut him loose. We pull his jacket, we feed him to the wolves, and we claim he was a rogue element acting alone. I'm not losing my pension for that meathead." Voss stopped reading. The air in the room felt thick and unbreathable. The brotherhood he had used to justify his corruption, the chain of command he thought would protect him, had been planning to throw him under the bus at the first sign of trouble. He had sacrificed his morality for a system that viewed him as entirely disposable. "They don't care about you, Harlan," Lena said, her voice dropping into a register of quiet, persuasive reason. "Captain Langford is sitting in his office right now drafting a memo to the superintendent, stating he had long held suspicions about your conduct. They are going to pin every dirty arrest, every missing dollar, and every planted bag of dope on you. They are going to make you the sole scapegoat." Voss looked up at Lena. The defiance was completely gone. He looked broken, terrified, and suddenly, violently angry. But the anger wasn't directed at the FBI anymore. It was directed at the men who had abandoned him.
"What do you want?"
Voss rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus Hale reached into the file and pulled out a fresh, crisp document. He placed it squarely in front of Voss alongside a black ballpoint pen. At the top, bold black letters read, "Proffer Agreement and Cooperation Pact." "We want the whole house," Hale stated plainly. "We want Langford. We want Cole. We want every officer in the 8th District who took a dime of dirty money or planted a single piece of evidence. You sign this document, you are waiving your right to a trial. You plead guilty to 1 count of civil rights violation, and you agree to wear a wire." Voss stared at the pen. "If I wear a wire against Langford, I'm a dead man walking." "If you don't," Lena countered, "you are going to federal prison for 20 years, and Langford will spend his retirement on a golf course in Florida laughing at you. We will recommend a downward departure at sentencing," Hale added, playing the final card. "You help us bring down the command structure. We ask the judge for 5 years instead of 20. You do 3.5 with good behavior in a low-security federal camp. That's the deal. It expires the second I walk out that door." Voss sat in agonizing silence. The hum of the ventilation system seemed deafening. He looked at the transcript of his captain plotting to destroy him. He looked at the video still of himself planting the meth. He was trapped in a box entirely of his own making. Slowly, his shackled hand reached out. His fingers trembled as they closed around the black pen. Harlan Voss pressed the tip to the paper and signed his name, officially turning the apex predator of the 8th District into a federal rat. Lena Hart watched him sign, her expression entirely neutral. She stood up, smoothing the front of her tactical shirt. "Welcome to the task force, Detective. We have a lot of work to do." Harlan Voss returned to the 8th District Precinct a few days later, under a carefully constructed federal cover story. The official narrative handed down by the state's attorney was that the Lydia Bennett case had been dismissed due to a severe chain of custody error regarding the evidence. Captain Victor Langford accepted the lie, relieved that his precinct had dodged a massive public relations disaster. He had no idea that the man walking back into the bullpen was a walking federal surveillance node. Buried deep within the thick Kevlar fibers of Voss's service vest was a state-of-the-art micro-transmitter broadcasting a continuous encrypted signal directly to Lena Hart and Marcus Hale in an unmarked van 2 blocks away. For several agonizing weeks, Voss lived on a razor's edge. Every conversation, every ride-along, every locker room whisper was captured. The FBI didn't just want Langford. They wanted the entire network. Voss was forced to initiate conversations about illicit cash seizures, prompting his fellow officers to implicate themselves. The climax of the operation occurred on a humid Friday night inside Langford's private office. Voss, sweating profusely beneath his uniform, closed the heavy wooden door behind him. He needed Langford to explicitly detail the precinct's slush fund.
"Boss, we need to talk about the Ramirez raid,"
Voss said, his voice tight, referring to an illegal shakedown of a local auto body shop the previous week. Officer Rafael Soto is getting paranoid. He thinks Internal Affairs is looking at the seizure logs. We pulled 40 grand out of that safe, and you only logged 10. Langford leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He stared at Voss for a long, suffocating moment. "Are you wearing a wire, Harlan?" In the surveillance van, Lena Hart tensed, her hand dropping to her radio. If Langford searched him, Voss was dead. Voss let out a harsh, bitter laugh, forcing righteous indignation into his voice. "A wire? After I just took the heat for the Bennett mess so this whole house wouldn't burn down? If you don't trust me, Victor, pull my badge right now." Langford studied him, then slowly relaxed. "Calm down. I have to ask. Tell Soto to shut his mouth. The remaining 30 grand went into the offshore account in the Caymans, just like the money from the West Side narcotics sweeps. We divide the dividends at the end of the fiscal year per the usual arrangement. Nobody is looking at the logs." In the van, Lena exhaled a sharp breath, a cold smile touching her lips. "Got him," she whispered. Langford had just confessed to money laundering, grand larceny, and conspiracy on federal tape. The house of cards was finally ready to fall. The raid came at dawn. Before the morning shift could even pour their coffee, 20 black tactical SUVs swarmed the 8th District precinct. Heavily armed FBI SWAT teams secured all exits, flooding the building in a synchronized wave of federal authority. Captain Victor Langford was pulled directly from his desk, his coffee spilling across his precious seizure logs, as federal agents slammed him against the wall and locked his wrists in heavy steel handcuffs. Down the hall, Officer Rafael Soto and 6 other corrupt patrolmen were disarmed and marched out into the blinding morning sun, stunned and humiliated in front of the local news cameras that the DOJ had tipped off. Lena Hart stood in the precinct lobby wearing her FBI windbreaker, watching the parade of disgraced cops. When Langford was marched past her, he locked eyes with her, his face twisting in a mix of fury and dawning realization. He finally recognized the woman from the dismissed traffic stop case.
"You,"
Langford spat. "Me," Lena replied simply. "You're looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Captain. Watch your step on the way out." Harlan Voss was also arrested that morning to maintain his cover, but the truth was revealed during the unsealing of the federal indictments. In total, 14 officers of the 8th District were charged under the RICO Act. Langford fought the charges and lost, receiving a 22-year sentence in a maximum security facility. True to their word, the FBI submitted a downward departure for Voss. He pled guilty to his civil rights violations and received 5 years in a low-security federal prison. He lost his badge, his pension, his freedom, and his reputation. As the sun set over the purged precinct, Lena Hart quietly slipped out the back door, got into her unmarked vehicle, and drove away. There were always more predators hiding behind a badge, and she was already hunting the next one. The spectacular downfall of the 8th District serves as a chilling reminder that those who wield absolute power are never truly untouchable. Harlan Voss believed his badge was a shield that allowed him to prey on the innocent in the dark, entirely unaware that a far more dangerous predator was waiting for him in the shadows. Justice, it turns out, wears many disguises, and sometimes it looks just like the perfect victim. Thank you so much for listening to this true crime deep dive. If this story of corruption, betrayal, and ultimate justice kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, share the video with your fellow true crime addicts, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life stories.